Good evening, everyone. I'm hoping this is working.
Good evening.
It looks like
Evening.
it's working. We'll just wait a couple minutes for people to join. But I hope everybody's having a good evening.
Wait, right now I'll be back. I need to check something real quick. Just, I don't know.
Awesome. So we are live on StreamYard. If anybody knows what StreamYard is, this is my first time using it. But this is generally what we use when we go live. And it's pretty cool. I can see all the comments and all the likes and how many viewers we have all directly on StreamYard's platform, which is pretty cool. Looks like we have a few viewers. We have 16. All right, well, I'll get started anyways, just to introduce myself. I have not done one of these yet, so this is my first time. I am Rebecca Friedel. I am one of the directors of Heritage Education Network Belize, along with Sylvia Batty, April Martinez, and Ella Bakeshi. You guys probably know their faces quite well because they are often on these lives. So, yeah, I'm excited. This is my first time, and it just happens to be Archaeology Day, which is something I love, right? I love archaeology. Hi, Sylvia. Hi, April. Yeah, so Heritage Education Network Belize is a nonprofit 501. It's based in the U.S., but it is focused on Belizean cultural and natural heritage. And what we really want to do is create networks and bridges across disciplines, across industries, to help people embrace their cultural and natural heritage, because we believe it's a sustainable way forward, right? Especially in our very uncertain world. So, like I said, today is Archaeology Day, International Archaeology Day, and we have a very special panel I'm really excited about, and we're going to talk about how archaeology is relevant to Belisians today. I should mention that International Archaeology Day is something that has been established by the Archaeological Institute of America. So there are tons of different events that have been going on all week. We had one earlier on Wednesday, but there's probably been a ton today. Usually they're in person, but of course we are in a pandemic right now, so everything's virtual. But if you guys really are passionate about archaeology, you should definitely get out there in the field and try it, because that's the best way to learn about it and to experience it, right? So before I get started, so the structure of our panel is I'm going to give a brief presentation about the history of archaeology in Belize, just to sort of contextualize our discussion. And then we will open it up to our panel, and we'll have Q&A and discussion, and our lovely panelists will be able to tell us how they find archaeology relevant to their lives, and why you guys should also find archaeology relevant to your lives. So without further ado, I will allow the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with
Hi, my name is Ramari Ku. I really like archaeology because I think it has so many influence on how we think, how we perceive everything, and how we really interpret our culture And I'm not just talking about Mayan culture, but you're talking about various cultures. And I think it's really important to understand that itself. So I'm really passionate about archaeology and what it stands for and how it can really help us right now and in our future. So, yeah.
And next we have Ismail Tua. I hope I said that right.
Teal. Hi, good night, everyone. So I'm a former graduate of Yale University under their anthropology and archaeology program. Back then, really, I was really influenced by our ancient history that we had. Growing up, I always saw these really magnificent temples, and the curiosity inside is what drove me to study in that field. No, and then, well, things just take off. And I love to discuss some of my experience that I had using some of the skills that I learned throughout my time in archaeology.
Awesome. Thanks, Ismail. All right, and next we have Nadimi via.
Hi, my name is Nadimi VR. I am presently a history student at UB, but I just recently graduated from Johns, and I have an associate's degree in history and literature. I decided to be a part of the panel, even though I don't specifically study archaeology. I do have to read some articles and anything related to the Maya civilization in Belize, and it's really and truly fascinating. And I wanted to be a part of this panel today to share about things of how reading about the Maya mythology, and that is essential to promoting our culture in Belize, and how we need to have more of our own Belisians reading and discovering more things about the Maya world.
Sorry, you couldn't hear me. Thank you very much for that, Nadimi. We're very happy to have you. And last but not least.
Hi, everyone. Good night. My name is Paul Smith. Most people call me Paul, because that's my name. But I have always been interested in information, in understanding how things work, And so, for me, history in general, history has always been an interesting field to me because, it explains to us, it draws apart to why we are in the position that we are in. And from history, I got introduced to archaeology. And now Maya archaeology in Belize has a lot of hidden information about the past peoples that were here, and even correlating with the present Maya population in Belize, and the greater impact on our whole Belizean culture. So I've always been interested in knowledge and understanding things, and so for me, archaeology correlated history, correlated my search for knowledge, and it combined that with my love for nature and the outdoors. So I decided to pursue archaeology.
That's great. That's a very good point. That archaeology is it has a lot to do with being outdoors and enjoying everything that's around you, especially in Belize, right? It's tons to see, both natural and cultural heritage, right? So thank you guys all for being here. I'm super excited for each and every one of you to have our discussion in a bit. But before we go ahead, I am going to have just a brief presentation about the history of archaeology in Belize. And just to contextualize, what is archaeology, in case you guys don't know what archaeology is. It is considered, largely it's considered a subfield of anthropology. States. And a lot of Western cultures, and in Belize, right? So archaeology is one of the 4 subfields of anthropology, and specifically is interested in how people in the past lived and archaeologists do this. They study the way people in the past lived by looking at their material remains. So that material culture that is left behind from people who lived in the past. This can be anything from buildings to things like artifacts. So when we're thinking of artifacts, you probably are thinking of pottery or stone tools, things like that. So that is your tangible cultural heritage, those material things that represent your culture. And of course, we are also interested in intangible cultural heritage, but those ideas and words and thoughts aren't quite preserved in the archaeological records, so we have to use those material remains to try to understand that intangible cultural heritage. So archaeology is specifically focused on past tangible cultural heritage. So to talk about archaeology in Belize, we're going to have, here, let me put this. We're going to talk about it in sort of eras or different time periods. And these are general time periods that most archaeologists use to talk about archaeology in general. But the 1800s is considered sort of the early explorer period throughout probably Central and South America. And this is when we see people like Stevens and Catherwood exploring the Maya area, and they even came to Belize. And in Belize, this era saw a lot of early explorers who were more what we would call antiquarianists. So they were interested in acquiring material objects, right, artifacts, to bring back to their home countries to put on display. They weren't interested in actually documenting anything that they found or doing any sort of scientific excavations. But within Belize in particular, there was some important events that happened. So in 1894, the Ancient Monuments Protection Ordinance was passed. And this was sort of the first attempt, because Belize wasn't quite Belize yet, right? So it was still considered British Honduras, so it was under the rule of England. But England was recognizing, and ideally they were supposed to be protecting the monuments and ancient sites, crown land. So that did not include privately owned land. Ironically, though, even though this was in place in between 1896 and 1936, the famous, I would say, I wouldn't necessarily call him an archaeologist, but for lack of a better word, we'll call him an archaeologist. His name is Thomas Gahn, and he's quite famous because he explored several sites in Belize, particularly Chinantanich, which is probably one of the most famous sites in Belize, Lubantun and Santa Rita, all with dynamite, which we would not do today, right? So that was a little problematic, and probably didn't document everything so well using that dynamite. But then in 1904, we had Theobert Maller visit Chinantanich. So this was sort of the first major project directed at studying Chinantanich. But at the time, Chinantanich was not known as Chinantanich. It was known as Mount Maloney, because Mount Maloney, this was after Sir Cornelius Alfred Maloney, who was the governor of British Honduras at the time. Or no, from 1891 to 1897. So Chinantanich had been named after him prior to it receiving its current name of Chinantanich. So no doubt Cornelius Alfred Maloney was a European, right? So this ancient Maya site had a name from a European. So the next general era that we're going to talk about regarding archaeology in Belize is when institutions start to play a large role in archaeology. And so this generally happened between 70, and we see a lot of new sort of laws put in place during this time period, probably as a result of all of the actions and behaviors of those early explorers, right? Like Thomas with his dynamite. So in 1924, the Ancient Monument and Relics Ordinance was passed, and this allowed landholders private ownership of sites. So if you had a site on your land, you could own it privately. And it also allowed for 50% of the finds, artifacts, and everything found within an archaeological season by a project to go to the archaeologist or the sponsoring institution. And typically those sponsoring institutions, I shouldn't say typically, they were always foreign institutions. So that means tangible heritage was legally leaving Belize or British Honduras at the time to places like Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. So a lot of Belize's tangible heritage was placed in museums, held in universities and things like that in these foreign countries. So, but prior to that, the archaeologists could take whatever they wanted, right? But so this was sort of the first step to sort of limit how much they could take. And then in 1926, we see Sir Eric Thompson, who was the first actually academically trained archaeologist to do research in Belize. And he, again, worked at Chinantamish and Lubantun, and then add Minanha to the list. He also did a ton of work at monumental structures, so he wasn't just interested in those elite monumental centers. So some sites called Mountain Cow, Kahal Pichik, and Camp 6. And then 2 years later, 1928, we see the Antiquities Ordinance. And so this sort of allowed the government to have some control over who could have possession of artifacts and sort of reduce the illegal sale of artifacts. So the government could acquire antiquities if they came across them. And it also put in place some penalties for exportation of antiquities without the consent of governor and council, but this only applied to crown lands. So this didn't apply to privately owned land. And then in 1957, finally, we the Department of Archaeology established in Belize or British Honduras government, and the first archaeological commissioner is A.H. Anderson, of course, a European, right? Then we see 1964, Belize gets self-government granted to them by Great Britain, and then in 1960s, Belize decides to make all archaeological sites and artifacts property of the Crown, not just on Crown land. So that means anything on privately owned land as well. So the sort of final period we're going to talk about is what I'm calling post-colonial Belize. And so it starts in 1970 and it comes up to the present, right? So this is generally when we see Belisians taking hold and taking pride in their and becoming the sort of safeguarders of them. This is when they first get those positions of authority to control their own tangible cultural heritage. So in 1970, we have the Ancient Monuments and Antiquities Ordinance. This is when all tangible cultural heritage is vested to the state. 1971, we have the first Belizean archaeological commissioner, Dr. Joseph Palacio, who I believe is still alive today. He is an anthropologist and he does a lot of really great work throughout Belize. I believe he is of Garifuna descent. Then in 1979, we have Harriet Topsy, who was a very influential director of the Department of Archaeology. And the Niche Act is largely modeled after the change, which included requirements to backfill or conserve when archaeological projects were being done. And then, of course, in 1981, Belize gains its independence, so it is able to establish its fully independent government. So then by 2003, we have niche officially created, and the Department of Archaeology officially becomes the Institute of Archaeology. There are a few branches of niche. So the Institute of Archaeology is one, but we also have the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, the Institute of Creative Arts, the Museum of Belize, and of course, all of the many houses of culture in Belize. And then 2013, we have at least one bilateral agreement between the US and Belize is established for the protection of archaeological materials from the pre-ceramic period to the period. So, of course, Belize also has these bilateral agreements with Guatemala and Mexico. But ironically, even after it signed this agreement to protect the archaeological material, we see no Mool happen in 2013, right? And I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with what happened at No Mool, but basically an excavator illegally destroyed an entire ancient Maya temple, which is pretty terrible. So because of that, we see a revision of overall charges and penalties in the law, which is more in line with regional penalties. So it's made clear that it is illegal to excavate, remove earth or stones without a license from the IA. No persons shall possess or have in custody any ancient monument or antiquity except under a license in writing granted by the IA. So we talked about this in our live on Wednesday, but if you have a personal collection of artifacts, you can get it registered with the IA and you can legally be in possession of those artifacts. Of course, you don't own them, but you can legally have your own private collection. So we also see that they made clear that no person can import, export, sell, or trade in any manner in an ancient monument or antiquities, or attempt to do so without a license granted by the IA. And no person shall sell, transfer, or otherwise part with any license or permit granted to him under the provision of this part. So generally, those kinds of agreements declared that it's illegal to excavate or take or be in possession of unpermitted artifacts or antiquities, right? So, more in-depth view of what archaeology is like in Belize today. We have a ton of different archaeological projects going on in Belize most summers. Of course, this summer was very different. There weren't I don't think any archaeological projects going on. But typically these institutions majority are probably from the States. There might be some from Canada or Europe, but there are institutions that come and they have to create a proposal and describe exactly what they plan to do and have a plan. And then the IA tells them whether or not they can do so. And more we see these archaeological projects engaging in what we call public archaeology, which is sort of what we are doing right now, which is engaging the public in what happens with archaeology and including them in that conversation. Of course, the Belize government also manages archaeological materials and archaeological sites through the Institute of Archaeology and niche more broadly. And education in archaeology and anthropology in general is sort of scarce in Belize, but luckily we have Galen, which has the Bachelor's in Anthropology program, and the University of Belize has a Bachelor's in History, and there are plans in the works to establish a Bachelor's in Anthropology and Archaeology program. But that's not to say that you can't engage with anthropology without an anthropology degree, of course, right? Or we have people who on our panel even who have degrees in literature, degrees in history. So these things overlap quite a bit. And then, of course, in order to get any sort of graduate degree in anthropology or archaeology, you're going to have to go outside of Belize. But hopefully in the future, you guys will get a master's degree or potentially a PhD, maybe way down the line, right? And sort of echoing what Heritage Education Network Belize is all about, cultural heritage is super important in Belize, in particular because cultural heritage is a huge driver of tourism. And for you guys in Belize, tourism in 2019 was accounted for about 45% of your GDP. Of course, for 2020, who knows what that's going to be. But yeah, in general, tourism is a huge part of your GDP, and most people are coming to Belize because you guys have an amazing diversity of cultures, including your ancient, tangible cultural heritage, right? So that is archaeology in Belize today. And I want to open up now to our panel, and we're going to have a discussion, and we welcome any questions in the comments. But in general, this is the question I posed to the panelists when we were preparing for this. But I want them to talk about it more with you guys. Why do you think archaeology is relevant to you as a Belizean? And I don't know who wants to go first, but anybody's welcome to jump in.
All right. That was a very informative presentation, Rebecca. First of all, wanted to say that, and I also wanted to say congrats to organizing this session for us to discuss. Now, I know archaeology has not been perhaps at the forefront of a lot of early career young professionals, no, and I think that bringing out this discussion, especially for our younger generation, I think that's a very good way to kind of kickstart appreciation for what we have culturally and environmental wise, no. um so circling back to your question, why is archaeology relevant to you as a Belizean? Well, first of all, I think that understanding our history really and our development has a lot to do with preparing for what we're going to face in the future. No, right now, as you've shown us, our economy depends a lot on tourism, not only the traditional tourism, but I think that now ecotourism has become a big market around the world. And seeing these ancient sites and to really get an understanding of what they're teaching us, I think is something that cannot be overlooked. No? So for me, it was just really learning about these ancient things. I think that in all of us, there's always that curiosity deep inside of us that kind of makes childhood so amazing that you kind of wonder all over the place. And when you look at these ancient structures and think that, there were people before you, that's kind of, that just adds to the allure of what archaeology brings, no? I think we could go further into some discussions, but for me, that's my more higher level response to your question. I don't know if anybody else has something else to say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would like to jump in there. No. Oh, I'm sorry, Omar. You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
I saw you turn off your mic, so I thought you were gonna talk too. But yeah, I think with the question that you brought up, that why is archaeology relevant to us as Belizeans, I think it plays a huge role of who we are today. Um, you or we as Belizeans, we get to understand what has brought us here through archaeological findings. And I'm not only talking about Mayan archaeology, but the various cultures that our country holds. Um, we get to understand the various aspects of their culture and how that influenced their daily life. And I think right now, as we're going through a pandemic, we can learn even more from what is happening now. Um, they went through several pandemics as well, so probably, well, not the same ones that we're going through, but they had their ways of dealing with it and coping. So I think that is how archaeology can be really relevant to a Belizean, because we can understand, or we can see how they went through their pandemics, and we can correlate it to how we're going through our one, and we can really learn about their history and how it affects us, and how we can embrace it and even advance with their history, since history, culture, they keep evolving. So it's only logical that we understand that so that we can help our future.
Yeah, I would like to jump in there as well, Rebecca. I agree with both Ismail and Umar is saying in their analysis that we need information of the past. You know, Umar was saying that the society in the past faced some of the similar problems or milestones that we are facing now, and that is true. Um, in archaeology, I think gives a depth perception that we don't get in any other field. You know, it lets us look at society as a whole from years, hundreds of years back. We can really see our faults or see our and see where we are going wrong when we are in the present. I think about every 100 years or so, we we get a new perception of what is wrong, and we feel like we are evolving for the better. But cultural evolution is not that straight of a line. It's a bit more complex, and seeing society from the past and seeing them, struggling with the same thing. The provision of food, shelter, health, education. It helps us to understand how we can better prepare or better deal with the stuff that we are facing now. I In the news recently in the U.S., not exactly archaeological, but showing that in the U.S. with the California wildfires, they were using techniques of the Native Americans to help control the wildfires. I'm not sure if these techniques are could date back to like early Native American archaeological records, but it just correlates to what we were saying, that that we deal with the same problem, and archaeology is sometimes the only means we have in getting information from the past, because a lot of these cultures didn't have written records, or the Maya did, but it may not have always survived. And oral records sometimes get lost as well, and so tangible cultural material sometimes is the only way we can get information. And so I think that's why archaeology is important.
I think that's a great point that you guys are making, that if we don't learn from our past, we're bound to repeat it, right? And that just means that we're going to have the same problems over and over again. So those are great points. Nadimi, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna give him my 2 cents to what Paul said, because yes, I agree that we should, like, archaeology is kind of like our only direct means of like seeing how life was in the past. And I mean, I think everybody can remember when they went to their Sun and Six trips to like all the different Maya ruin sites, and then they would like be immersed into like these various temples and like see all the different pottery and stuff. So it makes you wonder as to how these people used to live, and that's the job of the archaeologist, to tell you how their lives were and tell you the story and describe it as how it was. As I said before, I find it really important in terms of like promoting culture, because of how we don't really know a lot of stories personally of like the Mayas, and so it's kind of sad, but yet a lot of people know about it from its temples, and yet they find it like some sort of exotic primitive civilization. But like from the history books I've read, from the people who came and met with the Aztecs and the Inca, they said they were beyond anything that they could have imagined, and that they were even better than even the civilizations of the Romans and the Greeks, and yet we know more about them. But it's because because the Europeans had put a lot of money and a lot of effort, and had more of the money and the effort to go into and to discover pieces like as of the Battle of Troy. They discovered that it was true and that it was real. And it's such as those things as bring myths that they were a reality. And those are the things that we should be trying to do as Belizeans, to promote our own culture, because as you said, the Mayas civilization provides a big industry towards our tourism.
That's a very great point, Nadine. So now everybody's sort of talked about how knowing your history is really important. So that's something that archaeology contributes to you as a Belizean. So let's open it up to what are the diversity of skills that you have acquired through your studies of archaeology or history? What skills does archaeology bring?
All right. Let me kind of open up this discussion. It's more as someone who has gone through and kind of graduated from that area and now using a lot of what I learned there. When it comes to the realm of archaeology, I just love the more the tangible or the practical side of what archaeology brings. It's more of a scientific based skill, and that's kind of what I love more about archaeology as compared to the anthropology. Now I know we always say that archaeology is a sub component of anthropology. However, when I look at it, I prefer the archaeology more, not only for its field work and kind of just being out with the elements, but it's more of the scientific mindset that you would have to bring. So, for example, we just can't go in a site and say, "Oh, I feel like digging here," and you open up your unit and you go ahead. It kind of doesn't work like that. You need substantial evidence in order to show why you need to go there, and that comes from not only how good you are as a researcher, but I think it's a culmination of your education as a whole, because we can recall from many of our English courses, from our different liberal arts type of courses, that we need to do our references, we need to build our theories, we need, and all of that stuff, and those skills still translate over into the archaeology realm, where you still need your citations, you still need your references in order to justify what you're saying. And I think that not only not only is that provided by your education, but it's so applicable within the world of archaeology, and it provides an avenue for you to build on that skill, right? It's one of those rare subjects where you actually get to apply what you're learning in the classroom, no? For example, I could remember one talk that I went to. I mean, it was Dr. Awe presenting on the burns that they found, or some charred remains that they found over in a plaza over in Kahal Pitch, right? And where the debate has been that one person is arguing that this is evidence of war and perhaps the fall of that particular site, while Dr. Awe on the other hand was talking more. It's more of a ceremonial gesture where they burn these things in order to celebrate their ancestors a little bit after the fall of that site. So it's things like that that tells you that, you know what, this is more of a, you have your evidence and now you need to present it, you need to argue it. And the reason I'm bringing up this topic is that having worked for a while now, I see that becoming more and more common, where you have your evidence, but now you need to build the interpretation side of science, right? And I think that is some of the skills that you learn from this thing. here are the evidence, right? Here are the facts that we know, but what we don't know is how they all relate to each other. And building that story from the evidence is something I think that archaeology kind of helps you with, not only within your academic realm, but also in working, right? Whenever your boss tells you that, all right, we need to put a concept together in order to launch some program, first thing you need to do is you need to research, right? You need to say, all right, this is how this person does it. This is how that person does it. These are some of the things that work. So now let's put them together, these parts together, and then start building a story. And I think that's that's one of the greater skills that I've drawn from having studied archaeology. You know, so that's kind of my 2 cents there. I'm not sure what the others have to add.
When I like that you mentioned as a past graduate, so you're giving me a sense of what is to be expected. So I appreciate that. But as a student, I'm a student of anthropology, but my passion lies in archaeology. As a student of anthropology, um, I have taken some archaeological courses on my end, separate from school. I have tried to do my utmost best to be archaeologically educated. So this would include knowing my history, knowing the history of our country, knowing um, archaeological history. What I try to do by myself, taking the student outside, I try to the symposiums that IA usually hosts. I try to do my best to attend them because I feel like as a student and as an individual, you get really educated about what the discoveries are happening within your country and how they really impact your view on your country, your view on how you have interpreted a specific culture, a specific tribe. It really influences these things. So I really appreciate that the IA does that. I appreciate Galen because it does give me my archaeological courses that I truly enjoy. I'm taking a Maya prehistory course right now, and I absolutely fell in love with it. They were talking about the different things that Belize goes through, and I love that it's a Belizean teacher who teaches this course. So I think it's taking out the bias from it, but at the same time incorporating a love for their culture and a love for archaeological history. So that's one thing that I really love about that. When you're talking about the diversity of skills, I think archaeology really, even though it's a scientific thing, and I love that about archaeology, I think it can expand because most of the questions I would get when I said that, okay, I want to do archaeology, a lot of people would think you're going to be in the dirt. You're going to be doing a lot of cleaning. That's what they thought. But when I started to get a lot of exposure to archaeology, I started talking about what I wanted to do. I started talking to different people. I remember I met this lady at one event that Galen held where past graduates from anthropology who now work at IA, who now work at Niche, the museum of, who work at the museum. I fell in love with what these people were doing with their degrees and how they were helping our country, but in different areas, still with an anthropology/archaeology degree, but they were helping in different areas. I met this one lady who says that with what I wanted to do, how I wanted to perceive, she was telling me what different things I can do in this area. And I don't think a lot of people know that. So those are one of the things that I think you can really expand from just digging in the dirt. You can really expand to just educate and do a lot with your skills. And I think it makes you as a better person, really open-minded to think that when you're looking at pottery, it's not just, okay, this is it. You have to really think about why is that specific crack there? Why is this painting here? You're looking at different aspects of a certain object. So I think it really makes you more open-minded.
Absolutely. That's really
Yeah.
great. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely. when people think of archaeology, they always think of going into the forest and excavating, but it's a lot more. A lot goes on after excavating. My experience in archaeology and being a intern research assistant at the IA, I have learned to be somewhat very detailed when dealing with artifact consolidation and very creative. Um, and these are not fields, or these are not areas that I am naturally skilled in. And so doing archaeology has helped me to be a lot more detailed, and also being analytical. I mean, what field or archaeology is one of the field that requires the most analysis. You find stuff, you find information, but you have to understand what the information is saying. You know, and so I just want to add that in. For me personally, it has helped me be creative and analytical. Creative in artifact consolidation, creative in yeah, preparing reports or booklets that deal with artifact consolidation again, and being analytical in information that people find. So I just want to throw that in as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Being creative, being analytical. We had a comment from Ella that says she thinks that archaeology and anthropology is wildly underrated. The skills you gain from doing archaeology are essential in every area of life: organization skills, interpretation, management, human behavior, and understanding human behavior. These are big advantages in marketing, cultural sensitivity, travel, and being comfortable in and out of ordinary situations. Communication, problem solving, and she could go on. Recruiters are simply not aware and they are missing out. And relatedly, we also have another question for you guys. This is very April. Ms. Martinez says, for the students, why do you believe that archaeology is not a sought out career amongst Belizeans?
I would like to answer that a bit. Firstly, I don't think archaeology is really promoted or is really advertised in Belize as a course to take. I know a lot of people that don't even know that you can take archaeology in Belize. They don't know that Galen offers archaeology, so that might be a huge reason why. And also, we don't see a career path, in Belize besides working at the IA. That cannot take on all the graduates of archaeology, and so I think that those are some main reasons why people don't choose the field.
I think it's similar to history. Some people don't want to study history because of how they don't see it as what Paul said as a career that they could advance forward in Belize, and you wouldn't really work at anywhere else other than being a teacher and, like as he said, at the IAM institution. And so I think that it's because a lot of students as well see it very challenging, and that if they don't complete the degree, so they're, well, then what was I doing it for?
So I don't know if
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Rumari. But I want Ismail to talk about his experience because he has a very interesting career trajectory. But go ahead, Rumari.
Yeah. I think with that question, it's, as a student, I ask myself that as well. A lot of, I know people who would like to take archaeology, and they had asked me before, and they said, how did you even know that Galen offered archaeology? And I think it was a passion that I had, that I think since I was 11 years old, that I have wanted to do something in the field of archaeology. So, at a very young age, I tried to get very exposed of my archaeological heritage, cultural heritage. I tried to do a lot of things in the archaeological realm. But I think if you want to do it, I think that's where you have to do your research and really find out which schools offer these things. I really like that UB, and I even feel like taking a course there for the history of it. The history course, I want to take it. when you're talking about Galen, I really love that Galen offered anthropology with some minor subjects in archaeology. Um, but you get really good exposure. You get field work, which I truly I like. I would encourage those who want to pursue archaeology. You can study the different realms in archaeology, and you can do archaeology as well on your own. You can do there are certain books that you can even write with cultural heritage that you know about. You can do these things. You can visit these sites. Um, you can educate yourself in archaeology. Though, yes, there may be limited jobs, but I think this is where the community itself, students as myself, we can create these jobs. Um, you like NGOs, we can do these things because our community needs them. A lot of students would say, I'm almost done with my degree. So my group of friends, we would say, what are we gonna do now? Are we gonna have jobs? Whether it's always at the back of our heads, um, how are we gonna pay or stuff like that. So one thing that we would always remind ourselves is we can either continue studying or we can create a job. We can create fields where students can go into these fields for themselves. If you want to do something specific, you can do it. These are called NGOs, and I really appreciate the different communities that try to do these things. I think Corozal has this one where they educate these young people about their Mayan culture um, in a specific village. So I think that's really important that they do that.
Right. Right. Um, Definitely agree with what Romari is saying. I remember as a student of the discipline that back in the days when I started, that was definitely something at the forefront of my thoughts, but never really um ponder it too much because I know it would probably force me to kind of quit and do something else. But circling back, I think there's a lot here that we could uncover and that we could talk about. Number one being that yes, as a student, they are not being as exposed to what the job market has to offer. We do tend to think that, all right, well, what will we do after this? No, and that was definitely my experience after graduating from Galen with the anthropology and archaeology degree. Getting a job was one of the hardest things to do. Number one, not only because it was my first time looking for a professional job, but it was this idea that because you studied archaeology, you are an archaeologist, right? It's coming back to this idea that because I see you are, therefore I am, kind of thing, right? But we know that it's not how it works. Generally, things evolve over time, and if we look at archaeology again back in the days, and I'm talking centuries ago, one of the most sought after job was agriculture, right? Because agriculture, everyone do it. It's needed. It was necessary. But today, a very small fraction of our population produces much of our food, and now we have people doing very weird things and getting paid for it, right? For example, I'm trying to recall one of the weird jobs that I heard available here in Belize. And it was surprising that this person made money from that thing, no? So it's kind of circling back to this evolution of kind of how society evolves in order to meet its needs, and really and truly it is just a job of an area of skill. Now the reason I say that is because even though I have studied archaeology, today I'm not an archaeologist, right? Today I'm more of a analyst over at tact. But my direction has, I mean, much of what I've learned today has stemmed from what I actually studied over in my days in university, you know. I mean, let's coming back to, I believe it was Ella that you showed the comments earlier on, where she said there's so many skills to learn, which I agree with. I mean, communication is the number one thing, I believe, right? Um, you could have one of the most sophisticated and very highfalutin vocabularies, but if you can't communicate to the rest of the people, then you're practically useless, right? In sort of a blunt manner. But by understanding culture, understanding your audience, who you're with, who you're amongst, and going over and kind of at their level communicating your ideas and to get these buy-ins, as we call in the field, that then really supports what you're doing, right? And the next thing is the math. For example, when people think about archaeology, they don't think math, right? And for me, math has always been something near and dear to my heart. I never really liked writing. I used to space out half the time in some of my literature classes, but whenever math kicked in, it was just all fun and games for me. And especially when it came to mapping, for me, mapping was one of my I just love that, right? And in archaeology, that's what you got to do, right? Whenever you document your stuff, you need to map. And today, now we have very sophisticated software programs like GIS that's coming to the forefront. Not only that, but we have remote sensing with LiDARs, phototelemetry, Landsats, and these different things, archaeology again exposed me to that, and that's where I knew that, you know what, I am not only limited to what I know as an archaeologist, but the cartographic skills that you learned, the this idea of the unit, right, of establishing your square and kind of working with it in that area. That's such a fundamental part of what science is today, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you go in ecology or if you go even within the social surveys, you will always have to block out your study area. You're determining your sample size and all of these good stuff in statistics that we need in order to kind of not only get science done, but other things in businesses as well. For example, the more methodical you are in business, and the more predictable you are in terms of your analysis, the more you could project your growth. And everybody loves projection to the point that I've seen some questionable methods presented to business people that I say, oh, it doesn't work like this. But point is, though, that as long as you could present your methods, people tend to, all right, I see where you're going. All right, I want to give this a try. And I think that those are some of the more valuable things. I know people are always say that, all right, when I graduate from here, there's really nothing for me after this. I can't find a job. But I mean, it's because I think we limit ourselves to think that because we're an archaeologist, then therefore we can only do archaeology. But in our modern days, that I think that ship has sailed to where, okay, I am an archaeologist, but what have I learned? I've learned A, B, C, D, E, F skills, which I could bring to your company or I could bring to your NGO in order for you to achieve your mission and your vision. Every successful company needs to have a mission and a vision in order for you to kind of sell yourself as, all right, this is what I can do, no? So, yeah, that's again my 2 cents towards Rebecca's question and kind of circling back to what some of the comments were earlier.
So I think that generally everybody sort of agrees that there are so many different skills that archaeology and anthropology teach you, and you don't have to be an archaeologist when you graduate, right? There's many other avenues of career paths that you can take. NGOs being one, of course. There's also cultural resource management, which isn't as big as I think it should be in Belize. I'm not as familiar with the laws for those kinds of things, but I know in the United States, when somebody wants to develop land, um, they have to have an environmental assessment done, and then part of that environmental assessment is archaeological. So, and I know that IA has been doing this, and particularly with all of the highways, the road construction that's been going on. But I think that maybe it's too gentle. I don't know. I don't know if maybe Paul knows anything about this. But sorry to put you on the spot, Paul. If you don't know, you don't have to.
No, it's all right. You were talking about managing cultural heritage.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
PRM.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, in the IEA, we make sure that all modern developments, don't affect, try to limit its effects on archaeological, remains, structures, and such. So we go out and we monitor all developments, especially roads and things like that, that will really, you know, really change the environment, right? Really change the natural scape of the area. Definitely that's something that the institute does, and it's something that people who are sometimes not a part of the institute but have a background in archaeology can be subcontracted to do. So that's another job option. AIA's archaeological impact assessment does not always have to come from the institute, but from people in with a background in archaeology, and then the institute verifies. So yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose I just wanted to bring that up. That's also an avenue of a career path that potentially could be expanded. So I just want to highlight some comments from the audience. Ella says, yes, that is the reality today. The skills are relevant in other fields. However, if you want to keep to archaeology, you have to rely on creating NGOs and create your own job. Just like Rumari mentioned, I think it is essential to create a safer career path to the next generations in archaeology. I think that has a lot there, and how to create that career path for the next generation. I think access to education, creation of jobs, of course, everything behind all of those things can't happen without funding. And of course, with the pandemic going on right now, funding is few and far between, right? You can't. There's not much funding out there. So, but these are things that are worthy of funding and investing in, especially for the sake of allowing Belizeans to be their own sort of to safeguard their own culture, right? To be archaeologists of their own country. So I think that's really important. Then we had Megan says, I think Ellen Ismail correct. Gain archaeology, but we need to learn to better leverage those skills for careers beyond the archaeologist and teach our students how to leverage them, and for employers to recognize those diverse skills gained with an archaeology degree. So that sort of echoes what everybody's been saying, right? Yeah. We need to think out of the box. When it comes to future jobs, how can you help change our society? Okay. Does anybody want to try to address that?
I think like for future jobs, I think it's like the one that I mentioned where I said that it's important to expose people to the literature behind archaeology. Like for example, as I previously mentioned before, it's very interesting when you find out like how even Greek mythology got popularized, because a lot of people excavated it, and so it eventually became like general knowledge. And even today, like modern people on Wattpad just want to go ahead and like write stories based off of it, but it's because it's so popularized, and that is something very important to do. If for example, I think a story that we had mentioned previously before when we were talking, like in another one of our private chats, we mentioned about the story between Nachankan's daughter and a Spaniard who fell in love. And it's a very interesting love story because of how he basically was a prisoner at first, but they fell in love. I think Romari has a better understanding of the story because she read about it more. And that he basically had to win the heart of her father, which was the king, and then he eventually laid out the plans which helped the Mayas to defeat the Spaniards. Like stories such as those things are things that even I think today people could relate to in terms of like maybe having to approve of have a parent approve of love and stuff like that. And there's even other interesting stories such as like things that happen with witchcraft and even why the temples stayed the way they do today. Speaking of the serpents and the different things that were created on the stelas, all those different stories are needed, and they can help, for example, like in the entertainment industry. They don't really have a lot of stories based on the Mayas, and I think those are things that would be very interesting to write about and to publish and to film, not to just document like a documentary, but as how you have regular films on cartoons and other stuff like that. So I think that's one out of the box way that we could use archaeologists, and why it's important to fund for them here in Belize, and why it's important to have a career here in Belize.
Pertaining to that comment, that thinking outside the box, I think that is something that a lot of Belizeans, we stay stuck into that idea that this is like when you're talking about archaeology. This is archaeology, and coming out of school, let's say university, you're coming out of school, you're getting a job at niche. That's not exactly what's going to happen. You need to spread out and find different things that archaeology, the skills that archaeology has brought, can help you. I'm not saying that a job is going to come to you right after you finish school. That's barely the case. That's not the case at all. But it's saying that when you're talking about thinking outside the box, you're thinking about how can the sets from archaeology help your country, and not only in archaeological findings, but in different aspects of it. You're thinking about, when I mentioned NGOs, I think that's where this comment was coming from. When I mentioned NGOs, these NGOs, yes, they can be funded, but I have met several NGOs as well. That's why I mentioned the one from Corzal. There's a specific village, I don't know if it is Shaibe, Cristo Rey, I think. One of those. But I remember that I went there one time, and I was so encouraged at how they had developed their specific NGO. This is an archaeology. They want to educate archaeology, archaeological history, cultural history within that community. And I feel like they really inspired me to do that for for Belize, basically. When Nademi mentioned the Santa Rita story, I fell in love with the Santa Rita story, but I fell in love with how that was like it was the birth of the mestizos. So I don't really think that a lot of individuals are educated on that, and I feel like this is where we as a country, we need to be educated on these certain aspects. When you're talking about thinking outside the box, you need to find different ways of educating our country, educating these new generations that are coming into society about their history, about how important it is. When you mentioned books, I myself, it's been my dream, and I'm reaching there, but I would like to publish a children's book based on Santa Rita, but more on the history of Santa Rita in a child-friendly manner. So this is bringing history to children, will be our new generation, which will be the people who will help you out. bringing these stories to these kids in a fun, child-friendly manner, in a way that they can understand. They're learning about their history, they're learning about their culture, they're learning about their country. And I don't think a lot of students get that. My mom has been a teacher for years. She has been a principal, and she always manages to do trips which educate these kids. And as a child, I remember sometimes when I was probably in high school or in standard primary school, I remember going to these archaeological reserves, and not a lot of people would. They would just stand there, and I don't think these kids would really grasp the information that would be received, that either they are getting from these sites. And I would always do my best to educate myself on these sites. So when I came upon Santa Rita, or we're talking about Shenandoah, these sites here, it's really important for you to learn about their history, about what really happened within Shenandoah, what happened within Santa Rita, what happened in Cerros. These sites really influence on how our country developed. So I think that's really important when you're talking about thinking outside the box. There are different fields you can go within archaeology. You can expand the realm of archaeology to influence our new generation. And I think that's really important to do.
Yeah, in response to Grace's comment, um, technology has of recent, and I guess in the past, 50 years or so, been finding its way into every field. And in archaeology, it is no different, right? Archaeology is not the exception. And so that's another means of jobs within archaeology. So, whether it's creating virtual tours, or making a site more interactive, or even like Nadine and Umar was saying, creating literature, or short films that highlight archaeology in Belize. Those are ways that we can go outside of the box of archaeology, mixing the knowledge of the old with technology of the new, right? Which would really help to get across the information to the new generation. And we at the IEA, we always stress, one of our educators, Antonio Ferdell, he would always stress that the history of Belize begins with the history of the ancient Maya, right? And even the people before the ancient Maya. But we, the ancient Maya is ingrained in our cultural identity, right? As Belize as a whole, we celebrate all the cultures, and we are all proud of the ancient Maya structures. All Belisians, I've never met a Belizean that is not proud of the ancient Maya temples, and they claim it to be their own, whether they're Maya or not, right? In the sense, and so archaeology helps unify our cultural identity, and we as Belizeans, we need to study archaeology, because as much as we appreciate the help and the assistance of foreigners, we need to have a greater hand in telling our own history, and telling our own story, and unifying our own culture. Um, yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
These are all excellent ideas. I love the creativity that you all have when you're discussing sort of how archaeology can contribute to our society and to your country. And Paula has made a great point that this is everyone's history, and although Belize is a very diverse country, everyone lives in the country and should appreciate the history of that country, right? So not to plug my own work, but I myself and a few colleagues of mine, including Sylvia Batty, who's also a Heritage Education Network Belize, did publish a trilingual children's book based on archaeological research. So it's geared towards children, and we distributed it to a number of schools around the country. And like I said, it's based on real archaeological research, and it was illustrated by a lovely Belizean named Fred Wyram. But we need more of that kind of stuff. I actually told Nadimi about, and I'm sure maybe some of you guys have heard of Tekawani and Duende, which was Belize's first animated film, which is amazing, Maya's story. There's also a number of different myths about different archaeological archaeological sites. So there's one about a dwarf at Uxmal, which is of course up in the Yucatan. But I'm sure there's so many different stories that we could embrace and get people more interested in. Just like Nadimi said about Greek and Roman mythology becomes so popularized because of the way that people they wrote about it in popular media. And something that's actually becoming more prevalent, I think, is there's actually somebody who has been making Maya comics. I don't know if anybody knows of this person. Does anybody know? I don't know too much about him, but I just got a book about sort of graphic indigeneity, and there's a chapter about a comic artist that features Maya culture. Anyways, very, very interesting stuff. And yeah, so let's see. Maybe we can do one more topic if you guys aren't too tired. You can talk about, I don't know, tourism and development, sustainability. I think that was something that Paul wanted to talk about. Maybe? Anybody can jump in.
About tourism and development, you said, Rebecca?
Yeah. Or whatever you feel like.
Okay, I'm sure I could take lead on this one. So it is no secret that tourism is one of our biggest industries, probably our biggest industry, and archaeology is a major factor in that. The archaeology we have in Belize, and so definitely Belizeans could benefit from more archaeological work being done in Belize. I don't want to be vain and just put archaeology as a means to make money, but it does help the country, and we also want to be able to develop our country, but do it in a means that is sustainable and is archaeologically friendly, right? Like we were saying, the IA goes all around the country trying to monitor, destruction, looting, and we cannot do it alone, right? We rely heavily on the community's participation in reporting and stopping and spreading spreading that, keeping archaeological information intact and keeping the artifacts within Belize is the best for the country, right? We in Belize we have, I've heard of upwards of 2,000 sites in Belize that are not excavated, right? That's a lot, right? Belize is highly congested, and so more people studying archaeology means that we get more research done, and that is another area that Belize could benefit from, because Belize is trying to play in the global market, and we are trying to get credibility in our universities, right? Archaeological research is one way that we could get credibility. We could do in-house research and get our data out there as Belisians, right? Getting credibility for the work we've done, right? Credibility for our universities and our organizations within Belize. Um, Elevating our status in research, elevating our economic status. So yeah, I really believe that more students should pursue archaeology, both for researching, restoration, and mainly for protecting archaeological sites and features. Because like I said, the country is completely littered with archaeological sites, and every road that is being constructed, every field that is being plowed to produce food is likely disrupting archaeological features, right? And so we need more eyes, we need more institutions and NGOs that are out there promoting archaeology. We need more heritage network out there promoting archaeological conservation, right? And so yeah, definitely archaeology should be a field that is pushed more with young people.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with all of that. It's it's very interesting because like Paul said, there's probably a site, you know, in every field that's being plowed, in every area of Belize, right? Because this place was very, very, very populated, not only by the ancient Maya, but then, you know, we have the colonial period where we have Spanish and British individuals coming in. So, and of course, the Maya were still here. We still are here right now. But, you know, archaeology also that history as well. So there's just a lot to be learned and a lot to gain from an archaeological perspective, I think. Does anybody have some final comments, final words before we wrap up?
Well, I think for me, just kind of circling back to our whole point of doing this, or the purpose of doing this, really, is to, number one, not only highlight our pride in what we have as a country, but to accept or to appreciate that, you know, through this development, or through this work, we've really developed our country, and kind of help providing jobs for a lot of our people, not only within the business sector, but within the tourism sector, or the communities that surround a lot of these archaeological sites. And I think that lastly, looking forward, I think that now we need to start thinking about not labeling ourselves as an archaeologist and therefore only archaeology we could do, but as someone, can't remember who, said that we need to start leveraging our skills and market ourselves by saying that this is some of the skills that I have, which separates me from a lot of the other candidates whenever you're looking for a job, right? Or whenever you're creating your own jobs, that you have something to offer, not only to society, but to yourself and to your community. Now, which kind of goes back to this idea of having fulfilling work, right? A lot of us, I know a lot of young people, whenever they work, they kind of get, I don't want to say depressed, but they kind of get stuck in the sense that, you know, I mean, it's not fulfilling work, or it's not, well, it helps pay the bills. But at the end of the day, I think that when you follow a lot of these things and you learn how to leverage them, then you know, it kind of helps create opportunities, not only for yourself but for the people around us. For example, I'm sure that there's a lot of young students tuning into our conversation that hopefully is walking away with a different perspective, not only in archaeology and anthropology, but within history fields, or the literature field as well, no? So that would be my final thoughts here.
Absolutely. I think that you've made a really great point to sum everything up. That archaeology has a lot to bring to the table. That doesn't mean that everybody has to be an archaeologist. You can be in business, for example, and appreciate archaeology and appreciate your cultural heritage. I think that what we really highlighted here is that archaeology is something worth investing in. It's something that Belize should really take pride in. And we need to help create more avenues for more Belizeans to become archaeologists, to engage with those skills that archaeology can bring to the table. And yeah, so I really want to thank all of the panelists for joining us tonight. Each and every one of you has done an amazing job, and you've brought such unique perspectives to everything. So thank you, Rumari, Ismail, Nadimi, and Paul, very, very much. Yeah, so without any other comments, we're going to wrap up and sign off. Yeah, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks for inviting us to be a part of this. I really enjoyed sharing some of my experiences. And thank you all for tuning in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Heritage Education Network. And thank you guys for being an awesome panel. I enjoyed discussing with you guys.
Yeah. And thank you to our lovely viewers and commenters. We really appreciate it. Okay, have a good night, everyone.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, guys.